This video idea was suggested by Whiskey Fett. If you have any suggestions for future videos, please leave them in the comment section. Epcot's Future World is the first half of the park itself, and all of its pavilions are meant to be inclusive of the same overarching theme of the future. Every pavilion there would represent an element of what the future was supposed to hold, and how our current technologies and innovations would help us get there. These pavilions would together represent the future of oceans, ecosystems, energy, transportation, creativity, innovation, and communication. However, there was to be one pavilion that would combine all these elements together. One pavilion that would be the crowning jewel of Future World: Horizons.
Step into the future in Epcot Center's newest adventure. Step into the future in Horizons. Step into the future today.
General Electric sponsored the Horizons Pavilion and were more than happy to do so, partly because most of the rest of the park was built, so GE knew they weren't getting themselves signed up for some unfinishable project that's concept might have been a little bit too ambitious and would later be abandoned. The other reason being GE had past experience with Disney's company, and that experience had garnered them notoriety at the 1964 World's Fair when they had sponsored Progress Land, a Walt Disney presentation, or as is commonly known now, the Carousel of Progress. If you don't know how these pavilion sponsorships work, here's how. A company, in this case GE, sponsors a pavilion. Then, Imagineers conceive and design a ride. The sponsoring company pays any and all construction costs, and boom, a new pavilion's made. In return, the sponsoring company gets to have their logo featured on the pavilion, and has a say in the Imagineering process of the ride. GE's original idea for this ride would be one that showcased how Thomas Edison's invention of a light bulb was the beginning of what would eventually become General Electric, and that was it. Just a ride focused solely on GE. Thankfully, Imagineers objected to this idea and encouraged a more broad representation of America's future before the tie into electricity was dropped altogether, and the attraction could be more like its original concept as the epitome of all of the Future World pavilions combined. While Horizons was in its planning stage, it was called Century 3, which referred to America's third century that would encompass from 1976 to 2076. However, the name didn't make much sense to anybody outside of Americans who were projected to be a big part of Epcot's visitors. The ride's name was then changed to its new name, Future Probe. This name didn't stick around too long either due to its use of the word probe, and the given medical association with it, as it was thought to confuse people. And on top of that, it just doesn't sound very appealing. Finally, the name of the ride was changed to its final name, Horizons. Construction of the attraction began in 1981 and ran into a few problems along the way.
And this will be New Horizons, 21st century living, on the land, under the sea, and in outer space.
One of which being a $10 million budget cut to the last minute. But if you think 10 million's a lot, try 70 million, because that's how much the ride would have been to make pre-budget cut, so it's understandable why they weren't eager to throw another $10 million at the ride. In order to make up for the lost funds, the ride was scaled down at least 35% and 600 feet worth of track were removed. Even with these problems, the ride was completed on time. Construction was finished sometime in 1983, and the attraction was opened on October 1st of that same year, which was the first anniversary of Epcot itself. When Horizons opened, media and special guests gathered for the grand opening. Plenty of big names were there, including Ron Miller, CEO of Disney Productions, Roland Schmidt of General Electric, Florida's Lieutenant Governor Wayne Mixon, and Walt Disney World Ambassador Cynthia Pleasant. It was a pretty big to-do. Speeches were made, balloons were released into the air, and trumpets played the Epcot theme. The ride was very popular during its operating years with park guests, as it was basically the unofficial sequel to Carousel of Progress, which had already proved itself to be a big hit since it was first released in the mid-60s. In some aspects, Horizons could be considered better than the Carousel of Progress, as it showed a broad future consistently throughout the ride, as opposed to only showing a future in 1/4 of the ride. It was also an omnimover dark ride instead of a stage show. The omnimover system wasn't that different from the one used on the Haunted Mansion, the common thread being that neither stop and are constantly going on a track that allows for daily high capacity and allows for short wait times. The only real difference between the two is that Horizons cars hang from the ceiling while the Haunted Mansions remain on the ground at all times. Horizons also featured two 90-foot tall Omnisphere theaters in between sets, similar to the room at the end of Spaceship Earth. Horizons was also different from other rides in that it was interactive and would let you choose your own ending, a very unique concept that tied in with the ride's theme of a future with options. On September 30th of 1993, General Electric's sponsorship of the Horizons Pavilion was up when their contract expired. GE chose not to renew, and the ride was left without any financial backing for the first time in its decade of operation. Any mentions of General Electric were removed from the ride. For instance, the beginning of the ride, after you'd board, you would hear this.
GE Horizons passengers, you are now cleared for departure to the 21st century.
But in 1994, that was changed to this.
Horizons 1 is now departing. Our final destination today, the 21st century.
Along with that, the GE logos are removed from the interior and exterior of the ride.
From all of us, thanks for exploring Horizons.
Along with having no company sponsor came the issue of having no company funding, so now whenever something broke on the ride, an animatronic for example, it would stay broken, as it would be unprofitable for Disney to fix it, since it was coming out of their pockets and not General Electric's. During the ride's final years, parts of it had fallen into a real state of disrepair. Now, normally a 10-year-old ride can expect issues like these, after operating day in and day out, every day for that long. The only issue here was that Disney was hardly even attempting to fix these problems. But why? Why have such an iconic ride, such a big part of Future World and Epcot Center itself, be in such a sad state? Well, Disney would answer this question in the following months. In December of 1994, just 3 months after General Electric's contract expired, Horizons just closed down. No statements were given, no timetables as to when it might reopen, no indication beforehand, nothing. Things stayed quiet until 1 year later when Horizons suddenly reopened. Nothing inside was changed, no refurbishments or anything to explain this year-long absence, but fans of the ride really didn't care. They were just happy that Horizons was reopened. The real reason that Epcot reopened Horizons is because 2 other Future World attractions were closed at the time. Those rides being World of Motion, which was at the time being converted into Test Track, and Universe of Energy, which was being turned into Ellen's Energy Adventure. If Horizons didn't open back up, only one pavilion would be open on the eastern side of Future World, which isn't good. So Epcot really didn't have much of a choice other than to reopen for the next 3 years to make up for the other out-of-commission pavilions. But finally on January 9th of 1999, Horizons was officially closed down for good. Before Demolition began, Disney officials knew they would have to come up with a good excuse for completely demoing a ride that at this point had become a veritable cult classic at the park. There were a number of reasons put forward as to why the building couldn't be restored or its attraction updated. The first of which being that the new rides building would be way larger than the Horizon building, and they had no choice but to tear it down to make room for the new one. As it's already been proved, that's not true. The Horizons building is noticeably larger than its replacement rides building. Later it was alleged that a huge sinkhole was beginning to take form under the Horizons building. It was weakening the building to near collapse. This sinkhole allegation was later proved true by Marty Sklar, who was Disney's international ambassador. The sinkhole excuse is generally accepted today as the real reason as to why the attraction was ultimately demolished. In March of 2000, Horizons began to be emptied. Some props and sets were preserved. For example, the robot butler scene in the Easy Living section of the ride was moved to Disney's Hollywood Studios to be put on display. A few other props were moved to Disneyland Paris and can still be seen there today. There were also rumors of various other animatronics in the ride spotted around Disney parks, including this guy, as he was alleged to be stashed under Magic Kingdom's Carousel of Progress. I have no real way to confirm any of these claims, but I don't think it's really out of the realm of possibility that some of these animatronics could have been repurposed or are still intact and lingering around the parks. Also, the famous mural scene at the end of the ride, the prologue and the promise, was removed prior to demolition. It's currently in Disney offices, unable to be seen by the public, but hey, at least it wasn't destroyed. Later that month, the omnimover ride vehicles were removed, and there's seriously no telling where these things are. The most I can find is a few pictures of them stashed in some warehouse. Some people say they were sold off individually, others say they were all destroyed, and nobody really knows what became of the vehicles. Mission Space would be the ride to replace Horizons. It began its construction in September of 2000. The ride officially opened, however, on August 5th of 2003. For anyone who doesn't know, Mission Space is a simulator ride that has its riders operating a spacecraft on the first manned mission to Mars. The ride is most commonly known for its use of centrifugal force for the G-force effect. That is, if you choose to go on the orange team over green. Green is the exact same simulator ride, just without the spinning. If you want my opinion though, go orange if you can. I always think it's way more fun. I don't want to delve too far into the backstory or history of the ride, since I'm pretty sure I'll be making a whole different video on Mission Space when it gets replaced by something else soon enough. I mean, that ride's been open for at least 10 years now. The ride was built and opened without much prompt from the public, but much to the chagrin of Horizons fans who didn't think it was a worthy successor to the classic ride, and I'd have to say that I agree. Now, I've got nothing against Mission Space. I make it a point to ride it every time I go to Epcot, but through the research I've done, the recordings of the ride I've seen, and just the general feel of the attraction, there is something that Horizons has that Mission Space just falls short of having. That being some character. Yeah, Horizons focused on the future, but it showed our future. Mission Space just feels cold, and between the space theme throughout it and just being a simulator, it really takes away from the sentimentality you could have. Horizons still lives on today through various tribute websites, video of the ride, references and nods on other rides, and through its fans. Horizons really was the epitome of what the original idea behind Epcot was, that being the future and hope for it. Mission Space is fun, but it really is a far cry from what is still considered to a lot of people to be the best dark ride ever.